urgent. The AFU did it first. A hellish strike from Madyar, a fierce rout of Moscow. Putin's camp sounded the alarm. Chaos has broken out. All air defense tiers are down. The Kremlin hangs by a thread. And then another surprise. A loud statement echoed in Minsk. Lukashenko mentioned apologizing to Zelenskyy. Minsk publicly admitted it fears the AFU. You have to hear this for yourself. At the same time, the GOR started a new game in the south. A key highway is already under Ukraine's control. Now it's not just the land corridor to Crimea. A double blow. Our forces are tearing up the enemy's railway tracks. The occupiers' logistics are officially out of order. And all of this happened just now. Greetings. I'm Daryna Huts'kalo and we're starting. Next stop, the Kremlin. Just 15 kilometers away, the heart of the Moscow refinery is burning, specifically the ELO AVT6 primary oil refining unit.
Something just hit again. The whole oil refinery over there is on fire.
Today's attack on Moscow was one of the largest since the start of the year, resulting in a lightning strike on a plant that supplies up to 40% of the Russian capital's fuel market and about 70% of the entire region's gasoline needs.
The more Putin refuses to end the war, the more Russia will burn.
Ultimately, the attack on the capital's oil artery was confirmed by the mayor of Moscow himself. However, Sobyanin is assuring Russians that only one drone damaged the facility. Supposedly, there are no casualties and emergency services are working at the scene. Meanwhile, social media is flooded with footage of a swarm of Ukrainian drones encircling Putin's sanctuary. Russians are panicking. Rosaviatsia had to urgently close the airspace. 4 airports suspended operations at once. It seems anti-drone nets and even multi-level air defense didn't save Moscow. What's more, they made Muscovites even more nervous. Electronic warfare hit a residential building directly.
In Elektrostal near Moscow, a fire is reported in a residential building due to falling debris. Smoke is being recorded on the upper floors of a building in the Pivnichny district.
And that's not all. In the village of Poltavska, Krasnodar Krai, Russia, there's a fire at an oil depot after a UAV attack. The enterprise is an intermediate link between Lukoil's refineries and gas stations in the region. Madyar's birds brought another dose of action there as well. So, as we see, for years the Kremlin built an illusion of safety far from the front, but Ukraine's response is shattering these myths one by one. Revenge for the attacks on our cities finds the enemy even where they were certain of their own invulnerability. This is a real geopolitical explosion. Minsk has fallen to its knees before Kyiv. Lukashenko apologized to Volodymyr Zelenskyy and stated that he does not plan any military actions against Ukraine. The self-proclaimed president of Belarus even found an excuse for himself. Supposedly, the harsh words spoken the day before were a reaction to alleged threats from the Ukrainian leader about 500 targets in Belarus and plans to strike with missiles and drones.
If Volodymyr Alexandrovich took offense, I apologize to him for those words. Perhaps it wasn't even necessary, considering that he is, after all, at war. Maybe I shouldn't have spoken so harshly about it, but on the other hand, he must understand. As we often say, as they sing, so they are sung off.
At the same time, it's worth noting that it wasn't Volodymyr Zelenskyy who spoke about 500 potential targets in Belarus, but the commander of the AFU Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Brovdy, better known by his call sign Madyar. Meanwhile, Zelenskyy himself announced the strengthening of the northern border's defense due to risks from Belarus and the Bryansk region of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, the president unequivocally warned Minsk. If aggressive actions are taken against Ukraine from Belarusian territory, the country's leadership will face the corresponding consequences. It seems the effect of the sharp statements from our side on our neighbors was lightning fast. Lukashenko admitted that his army is very vulnerable and he is aware of this.
If Ukraine starts attacking Belarus the same way it attacks Russia, Belarus will be in the palm of the AFU's hand.
Is Minsk really setting a course for Kyiv instead of Moscow? We are following the developments. Now it's official. At this very moment, something big is brewing in the south. The GUR has effectively taken control of the key Nova Kakhovka Melitopol highway. Yesterday, Ukrainian special forces showed the spectacular destruction of an occupier's fuel tanker. And now, even more intriguing signals are emerging. Is Ukraine really preparing a new large-scale special operation that could seriously hit Russian logistics in yet another direction? And simultaneously, our forces are entering the heart of the enemy's railway. Now, not only land routes but also railway junctions are trashed.
The Crimean Wind Monitoring Group, based on satellite imagery, recorded a fire at the station at this very time. Over the next hour, the fire intensified significantly, which could indicate either the spread of the fire or a repeated strike on the facility. Currently, the railcar fleet continues to burn out.
Urgent! Putin's seat is on fire. Russia is entering a new explosive phase. You'll be shocked, but the dictator's web is gradually tearing apart. No one intends to stay silent. His inner circle is sharpening their knives. The bunker man's time has long since passed. Shocking details from the offices. The power struggle has reached a new level. You should be the first to hear what is known about this. For decades, Putin held on to power as if time in Russia had simply stopped, and the Kremlin itself exists under separate laws of physics, where everything obeys only one decision-making center. The system looked monolithic, the opposition doomed to silence, and any doubts quickly dissolved in the propaganda noise. But even the strongest structures have a limit to their endurance. What for years seemed like an unshakable throne increasingly resembles a place of internal struggle, where every move can already trigger the process of power redistribution. While the Kremlin officially continues to demonstrate monolithic unity, behind the scenes, it seems a completely different math for survival is beginning. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated that there has long been no single line within Putin's inner circle. There, according to him, roughly half want to keep fighting, while the other half is quietly looking for an exit button, as the Russian economy slowly but surely enters a state that Russian businessmen themselves prefer not to name out loud. According to Zelenskyy, even among people with big money and big connections, there is a growing understanding war is no longer a strategy, but a financial collapse in installments. And while some in Putin's circle are still playing at a great empire, others are already silently counting losses and looking for a way not to end up under the rubble of this structure. In fact, as the president hints, the Kremlin today resembles not a fortress, but a room where some people continue to shout, "Hold on," while others are already discreetly looking for the exit. And the most interesting thing is that both sides are still forced to sit at the same table, pretending that this is what stability looks like. Recently, everyone was shocked by an event reported by the Financial Times. A special video monitoring system that tracked the security of Vladimir Putin and his inner circle suddenly found itself out of the game. And while official explanations sound dry and technical, more and more people are asking a much more interesting question. Who and why dared to turn off the electronic eyes that guarded the most important residents of the Kremlin?
According to one source, the system, which is separate from the nearly 300,000 cameras in Moscow, was only turned back on after engineers thoroughly checked it. They tried to isolate Putin's security system from the internet. Such panic in the Kremlin arose after Israeli intelligence collected numerous video recordings from Iranian traffic cameras to determine the exact location of the Ayatollah.
Formally, everything is explained by concerns for security. Following high-profile reports of foreign intelligence using video networks, Moscow has allegedly decided to disconnect strategic systems from the outside world. But in political backrooms, far more somber speculations are already circulating. Because when security suddenly shuts down its own radars, a logical question arises. Are they protecting the site or instead leaving it completely exposed?
The system was only restarted after engineers thoroughly inspected it, attempting to fully isolate it from the internet, the outlet reported.
This looks particularly interesting given the statements from Russian security officials regarding the vulnerability of digital infrastructure. FSB chief Alexander Bortnikov essentially admitted that the massive surveillance network could become the system's weak point. However, many observers are pointing to a different aspect. If something extraordinary happens in the Kremlin tomorrow, the excuse is already prepared in advance. The cameras were unreliable, the network was under threat. Technical issues prevented them from controlling the situation. A very convenient narrative for any future surprises. And now the main intrigue isn't even about why the cameras were turned off. Something else is far more interesting. If in a state where control has long been a religion, they suddenly start disabling the most vital parts of their own surveillance system, then perhaps the greatest threat to the Kremlin is no longer outside its walls, but somewhere within them. Hidden hostility has long been brewing within Putin's inner circle. Former pro-government blogger Ilya Remeslo stated that he doesn't rule out a scenario where the Russian dictator is removed in a coup within the next year. And this is coming from someone who was part of the system for a long time before abruptly changing his tune. These statements were made in an interview with Ksenia Sobchak, a figure often ironically referred to in Russian political folklore as the Kremlin's goddaughter. According to Remeslo, the system is already bursting at the seams, and the main cause of the crisis, in his view, is personified by Putin.
The person at the very top who controls everything. That is Vladimir Putin. It's obvious. Everyone knows it.
Remeslo also emphasized that he is addressing those who are still within the system but are starting to hesitate. He speaks of creating a platform for those afraid to speak out against Putin and urges them not to fear, hinting at inevitable changes. His rhetoric sounds like an attempt to gather under one roof the scattered elements of the elite who no longer feel their former confidence.
I am using this interview to reach out to those who are still within the system. Don't be afraid, we will definitely win. There is a little time left and everything will be settled. I want to create a platform for those who are afraid to speak out against Vladimir Putin.
Remeslo himself predicts that Russia could undergo a profound transformation as early as late 2026 or early 2027. He is not talking about a classic coup, but about a quiet systemic change, something that resembles historical turning points of an era more than an open struggle. In his interpretation, this is a scenario where the country wakes up completely different without a single shot fired, but with a totally new power structure.
It will be very quiet, just like in 1953. We will wake up in a different country.
So it turns out to be a scenario quite familiar to history, when a system speaks the language of control, but already lives by the logic of internal calculations and quiet negotiations behind closed doors. The Kremlin still tries to look like an unshakable structure, but it increasingly resembles a mechanism in which every gear thinks not about moving forward, but about what will happen when the next one breaks. And in such systems, the most dangerous thing is not even external pressure, but the moment when everyone inside simultaneously decides that eternity is no longer part of their work schedule. At this very moment, a breakthrough right to the Sea of Azov. The armed forces of Ukraine seem to have managed to do what until recently seemed almost impossible. Russian troops are forced to retreat, and the scale of the occupiers' problems is already hard to hide even from the most devoted Russian war correspondents. They themselves admit certain sections of the front have turned into a real road of death. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to surprise with new approaches to waging war. Will this become one of the most important turning points on the front? Let's watch.
Primorsk is burning, guys. They're hacking in Primorsk.
The armed forces of Ukraine are breaking through to the Sea of Azov. The enemy's logistics in the Azov region are screaming for help. However, the unmanned systems forces offer the occupiers only a fiery thrashing. In the south, there's already a scent of a new large-scale operation.
The geography of the strikes covered about 20 regions of the Russian Federation, as well as the waters of the Black and Azov Seas. Bridges, air defense, oil depots, substations, factories, UAV warehouses, and concentrations of the occupiers' manpower are being methodically destroyed. Well, what about the special military operation? Everything is still going according to plan.
And that's not all. Ukrainian drones carried out a real audit of the occupation shipping and simultaneously visited 5 cargo ships at once that were working for the needs of the Russian army. The strikes hit targets near Berdyansk, Mariupol, and even near Yalta in the Donetsk region. For the Kremlin, this is much more painful than it might seem at first glance. It is through the Azov ports that the occupiers have for years transferred ammunition, fuel, equipment, and other cargo, without which the war quickly begins to stall. Now, every voyage increasingly resembles a maritime lottery, where instead of arriving at port, one might encounter a Ukrainian drone. The situation is given special symbolism by the fact that these same ports were used not only for military logistics, but also for exporting looted Ukrainian resources, particularly grain. It seems that for part of the Russian fleet, the export season is gradually turning into a season of big problems. And the Sea of Azov increasingly resembles not a safe rear, but a high-risk zone. Meanwhile, the transport blockade of Crimea is gaining momentum. The occupiers had to close another important crossing to the peninsula, the bridge from Henikesk to the Arabat Spit. And this is already the second key artery to be knocked out of the game in recent days. For Russian logistics, the situation increasingly resembles a bad dream, where there are fewer roads and more problems. Petro Andriushchenko, head of the Center for Occupation Studies, reports that a strike likely hit a bridge near Henikesk and the Arabat Spit. Combined with issues in the Chonhar direction, this creates a very grim picture for the Russian forces. What was recently seen as a safe rear is slowly becoming a bottleneck, making it harder to move troops, equipment, and ammunition. This is especially painful given the ongoing fuel crisis. Following several Ukrainian strikes on oil depots and logistics hubs, the occupiers are already facing fuel supply disruptions. Now, every newly blocked route only makes the situation worse. It seems Russian logistics now follows a rule. The longer the road to Crimea, the less fuel is left in the tanks. Most troubling for the Kremlin is that problems are piling up from all sides at once. Ukrainian drones are hunting fuel tankers and trucks deep in the rear, while land routes to the peninsula are under constant watch. While Crimea was once called Russia's unsinkable aircraft carrier, it now looks like an island being slowly but surely cut off from supplies. Things are also tense in the Donetsk region. Russians are sharing advice for driving on the Mariupol-Donetsk highway. They say to go at least 160 kilometers per hour and watch the sky closely for any surprises.
Stay extremely alert. Keep an eye on the sky. Don't turn on music, don't smoke, and don't drink coffee. Your job is to watch the sky to make sure nothing is hovering over your head.
There's no peace for the enemy even where they expected a safe rear. It seems the occupiers in Mariupol and the Azov region are stuck in a series called Arrival, Flash, Blackout. What was meant to be a showcase of recovery for Russian propaganda is now a place where power cuts happen more often than good news for the occupiers. Interestingly, the strike on the substation isn't about light bulbs in homes. For the Russian army, it's a strike at the very heart of their logistics. Key supply routes to the southern front pass right through Mariupol. And the railway, which they relied on heavily after the Crimean bridge issues, is becoming scrap metal without electricity. No power means no trains, leading to problems with delivering fuel, equipment, and ammunition. As a result, Russians have to move supplies in truck convoys. And that's where the real trouble starts. Roads get clogged with trucks and tankers, making them perfect targets for Ukrainian drones. It's a rather ironic situation. By trying to save their logistics, the occupiers are turning it into a long line of sitting ducks. Along with the power, the Kremlin's myth of a safe rear is also fading away. Mariupol, once a symbol of stability in Russian propaganda, now looks like a city under constant fire control. The more often substations fail, the harder it is to explain why this safe rear feels like a war zone. The situation is looking increasingly out of control for the Kremlin. The Azov coast, land routes to Crimea, fuel logistics, and rear hubs, all of this is gradually turning into a system where every new supply artery lasts only until the first disruption. Russian propaganda is still trying to sell the idea of stability, but reality makes its own adjustments every single time. Cargo moves slower, routes are getting longer, and the risks are drawing closer. And in this new geography of war, the main question is no longer where the next strike will be, but how many more routes this logistical structure can withstand before it starts to crumble along its entire length. It's truly hard to believe. Secret weapons are already in Ukraine. American missiles that make the enemy panic even before they're launched. They've been shown for the first time. The sky is buzzing with weaponry. Remote-controlled drones spanning thousands of kilometers. It's a new reality. Volodymyr Zelenskyy is fueling the occupiers' fear with new statements. Ukrainian ballistic-level developments that are no longer just a prospect. The harsh reality is knocking them off their feet. Missiles that can ignite a hell of revenge in Moscow and beyond. What other technological steps are being prepared, and why is the Kremlin increasingly nervous watching not just the map, but the sky? Let's take a look. While the Kremlin continues to tell fairy tales about its invincibility, Ukrainian weapons are reaching further and hitting Russian military targets harder and harder. What seemed like science fiction yesterday is becoming a reality today. New missiles, long-range drones, and revolutionary technologies are forcing Russian generals to nervously re-examine maps while officials scramble to invent more excuses for the public. So what contributed to this? A sensation. The first hints have surfaced online that Ukraine may have received mysterious American missiles from the Iran project, the AGM-188A, Rusty Dagger. Russian Z channels are anxiously circulating photos of an unknown 8-element antenna, allegedly found among the wreckage of a Ukrainian missile. And now Russian experts are feverishly trying to figure out exactly what just landed on their heads. A Ukrainian analytical channel pointed out the codes on the electronic module. According to their findings, the circuit board belongs to an American company, the main contractor for the Iran program. If this information is confirmed, the Russians will have to get acquainted with a new problem much closer than they would like. Another Ukrainian OSINT resource reports that they recently spoke with American defense insider Colby Madyar. According to him, the Trump administration didn't cut the project's funding, but continued to pay for contracts established under the Biden-era USAI program. The discussion involved Denmark, the Netherlands, and Norway, and Ukraine was allegedly promised these missiles after testing was complete.
It seems that later has already arrived.
The history of IRAM began a long time ago. It's a kind of hybrid between a cruise missile and a guided bomb, with a warhead of about 230 to 250 kilograms and a range of up to 450 kilometers. The project started back in the summer of 2024, specifically for the Ukrainian battlefield. The main requirements were as pragmatic as possible, cheap, mass-produced, and designed so that Russian electronic warfare systems would be left powerless. Official talk about the IRAM transfer began as early as August 2025. It was expected that the first missiles would arrive by autumn, but then delays began. Deadlines slipped, news vanished, and the project seemed to dissolve into thin air. And now it is bursting back into the information space. In the spring, military analyst Igal Levin released footage of IRAM tests from American F-16 fighters, and now there are signs that this weapon may have finally reached Ukraine. If this is true, then a very turbulent period may lie ahead for the Russian rear. The initial contract called for the production of 1,000 missiles over 2 years at about 40 units per month. Of course, figures on paper don't always match reality, but even limited supplies of such weapons can significantly expand Ukraine's capability to strike the enemy's near and middle rear. And this is only the beginning. Ukrainian defense companies continue to surprise even those already accustomed to technological breakthroughs. The company Skyfall has introduced a solution that literally erases the distance between the operator and the drone. While the P-1 Sun interceptor previously operated effectively at distances up to 30 to 35 kilometers, operators can now control it via satellite internet from hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. The battlefield is becoming increasingly dangerous for drone crews. The Russians are actively hunting operators using drones, artillery, and electronic intelligence tools. That is why leading Ukrainian manufacturers have decided to move pilots as far from danger as possible. Theoretically, an operator could be on another continent and still control a combat drone. An instructor from Wild Hornets, callsign Nazar, notes that the risks for operators are now much higher than a few years ago. This prompted the team to create a remote control system that removes people from the line of fire, leaving only equipment at the front. In March, Wild Hornets presented the Hornet Vision control technology. It allows for the control of interceptor drones from hundreds of kilometers away from the launch site. According to the developers, the Sting drone can already be controlled from over 2,000 kilometers away via the Starlink network.
We are currently working on making it possible to control the Sting, for example, from another continent, not just from another country.
First Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Oleksiy Vyskop, explained that Russia changes its drone tactics almost every week. This makes predicting attack routes increasingly difficult. That's why Ukraine is betting on technologies that allow a small number of highly skilled operators to work safely while monitoring the air situation for hundreds of kilometers around. It's not just about aerial drones. The company, Ratel Robotics, is implementing similar solutions for ground-based robotic platforms. The future of warfare increasingly resembles science fiction, which is making Russian generals more and more uncomfortable.
We are increasing the distance between the platform and the operator. If we control the machine via Starlink, the operator can safely be, for example, in any other country.
Zelenskyy emphasized that Ukraine is not going to silently take the hits. As long as Russia continues the war, the response will be inevitable. Over the years of the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainian defense sector has created dozens of new weapon systems, from long-range drones to promising missile complexes. So Zelenskyy warned Putin that Ukraine will soon be hitting Russia with ballistics. Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated that Ukraine will not just die in silence. Kyiv will attack Russia in response until it gives up on continuing the war. Over the years of war, Ukraine has created many different missiles and drones to be able to respond to Russian attacks. The president spoke about this in an interview with Sky News.
We don't have ballistic missiles yet, but we're on our way. We're very close.
The president also stated that Vladimir Putin has effectively lost the opportunity to end the war on terms favorable to him. Refusing new negotiations only accelerates the development of Ukrainian strike capabilities, which means that each subsequent month could bring the Kremlin more and more unpleasant surprises. Ukraine is already actively working on its own ballistic missiles. One such project is being handled by the company Firepoint. Its medium-range missile, the FPC, has already passed a series of tests. It is positioned as a cheap alternative to the American ATACMS and is capable of hitting targets at a distance of up to 300 kilometers. But even more attention is drawn to the FP9. This missile has a declared range of up to 850 kilometers and a warhead weighing up to 800 kilograms. Such characteristics allow for hitting strategically important objects far behind the front line. Firepoint co-founder Dennis Steilemann reported that the FP9 is already almost ready for testing. The final stage of engine testing is currently underway. If everything goes according to plan, the first test flights could start in the coming months. And then for Russian strategists, there will be another reason to look closely at the sky, where things they didn't expect to see at all are appearing more and more often. It seems the war is entering a new technological phase, where the decisive role is no longer played by the number of soldiers or tanks, but by the speed of innovation and the ability to adapt. While the Kremlin continues to talk about control over the situation, Ukrainian engineers are creating new missiles, drones, and control systems that are gradually erasing distances and changing the rules of the game. And if today Russian officials are nervously looking at the sky because of unknown missiles and drones, then tomorrow they might have to explain to their own population why the war, which was promised to be fought far from Russia, is increasingly reminding them of itself right under their windows.
On this note, we conclude our broadcast. We continue right now to follow the most current events to be the first to tell you about them. Don't forget to subscribe. See you!